an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering of Darkness and Dawn, The Elder Empire Shadow Book 2, chapters 8 and 9. In these chapters, Shera and Ayana go and visit the Luminian citadel. And somehow last episode I didn't put it together that the reason they were coming to talk to the Faceless Man is because his order is the one they think has these kids that disappeared. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to George for commissioning this episode. George is here in the chat to help feed me information, and also Sammy's here. Hi, Sammy. So, yeah, these chapters, guys, like I said, I can't believe that I didn't put together that was what was going on. I think because we're jumping around so much in the story, and we're going back in time and dealing with what was going on with the Emperor. We're also going to other people's POVs and learning about the activity of the elders or regents. I think that I straight up lost track of the fact that Shera is even on a mission to find these kids at all. I just truly, that was set aside entirely in my brain. And once we start getting into this episode or these chapters, I was like, oh, that's why they're there. Because there was something that I had assumed, that they were looking for him specifically, and him being Darius, that is his name, right? And they were for reasons, but not because of him, if that makes sense. So yeah, I just had the whole weird twisted idea of what was actually happening here. So chapter 8 starts off with the oath of the Luminian Knights. We swear to place the lives of innocents above our own, to seek the good of the order above glory, order is capitalized, and to bring the light where it is darkest. We will live our lives as representatives of the unknown God, capitalized, unknown and God. And to the elders, those serpents and authors of darkness, we will show neither mercy nor compassion. To the servants of the void, we bring only death. So, there you have it, folks. And I think that just hearing this oath made me think about some things. Jyrene tries to convince Shera when she's locked up on the Grey Island in the previous book. She tries to convince Shera that there is a lot of worthwhile knowledge that is in elder hands. And that if only they could open their minds up beyond their fear of the elders to accept some of the knowledge and wisdom of these creatures, all kinds of incredible things would be possible. To which Shera replies, "Got it, you're an idiot." And at the time, I was 100% Team Shera. But then we start off this book with a point of view of a regent who is bonded to an elder and is doing good. Granted, there's another regent who is terrible and sucks. So, it's the kind of thing where I really just straight up thought, okay, Jyrene's just deluded, wrong. And the thing is, I don't think she's 100%, I think she's 90% wrong. Because what it looks like is if you can find a person who can handle this kind of power, then, and they have like a moral code, then maybe. Oh, George says both Esther and Algius were soulbound to Chimera, not Elder artifacts. Oh, you're right. I forgot. She was soulbound to the Chimera that she killed the dragons, right? What was it that he was bound to? I don't remember. So if they're bound to Chimera, then why would the Luminian Order be after them? Like the whole vibe here is that they aren't in this chapter. I tend to believe this guy saying that he doesn't know what happened to them. But just overall, the fact that the Emperor was bound to the heart, a heart of Nakothi, and was able to do as much good, and I put it an asterisk after good, as he did, it's an indicator that maybe there's a like kernel of truth in what Jyrene says, but the Emperor was just an exceptional person, you know? And it's the kind of thing that for the vast majority of people, that's not going to be how this goes down, especially because the bond that he made with it, it was like a purposeful thing. So it's different than like, you know, the Elder who is, for example, Akhmagut taking over an entire island of people to just like research them. That kind of influence is completely non-consensual, I guess is the word. So, and you can't always like decide which one you're going to have, you know? Jyrene is sort of talking about, well, if we like welcomed elders in somehow, and there's no like really specific, you know, she doesn't talk about what that would look like or how that would work, but Jyrene is sort of acting as if we can opt in. And from what I'm seeing of this world, that's also a huge exception to the rule. Being able to opt in versus getting roped in whether you like it or not. That first one seems to be a lot less frequent than she is positing. So anyway, I just wanted to sort of like loop back to that because I find Jyrene sort of interesting in the fact that she clearly believes what she is saying to Shera in that scene, but she's also young and inexperienced enough that when she, you know, has to make her escape and everything doesn't go quite the way that she was expecting, she's a little bit disillusioned by, you know, the way that she is treated and the way that, just the way that pretty much everything goes during her escape. And I want to like sort of understand her more because she's intelligent. I know that Jyrene is like a smart person, but it's so easy when you're young to just believe what the people are telling you, your elders are telling you, lol. And I think she's starting to realize that it isn't as simple as she has been taught it is. George says the consultants just said the Luminians had the kids last, so I think they are just starting their search there. They said they had the kids last, but there was also like a sort of sense from the meeting that, well, all of a sudden the kids disappeared right before all of this stuff started happening with the regents. So maybe they're basically like black ops now. That was sort of the first suggestion that it felt like it was just like an implication, not really a complete accusation. And just the way that this interview goes with Darius's, I think it's his grandfather, I believe that it's been pretty much, that possibility is like washed out of Shera's head at this point. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So Shera and Ayana had to abandon their rooftops to follow Darius and his pilgrim, for which Shera was grateful. Now, this is really funny, because they are following him from afar, and I understand taking this measure in theory. But having been in Darius's head and knowing that he was straight up willing to just bring them, probably, it's just really funny to see all the effort they are putting towards being stealthy when they could just have ridden in the wagon that he had with him, and he would not have cared, and it would have been fine. But, and I love the description of, yet again, these like weird sort of disguises that they have. Ayana ended up with a white dress that did nothing to hide her 6-inch bladed fingernails and highlighted her ghostly complexion. She had to steal a purse in which to conceal her hands as though she were rummaging around for something, but she would have attracted less attention in her blacks. And I keep thinking about her just, I guess, walking around perpetually rummaging in the purse, which, that's just so awkward and funny to me. And plus, like, if you're rummaging in a purse, you have to hold it with one hand. So on one side, her claws have to be like semi-visible. So it's really only a disguise for one hand. And I don't know, this just cracked me up. Shera walked along in a man's suit. She had raided a poor man's ragged wardrobe for a reason, because cheap clothes were typically looser cut and easier to move around in. But apparently, this dock worker had spent everything he owned on a respectable suit, as it was the only thing in his closet. Which, honestly, broke my heart. This man spent all he had for one extraordinary outfit, and she took it. That is really rude. I would be so mad. Can you imagine? You just got so excited. You just wanted all you wanted. Working your whatever dead-end dock worker job. You saved up to get that Versace. And it's hanging in the only thing in your closet, pride of place. And you come home and it's fucking gone. Ugh, the worst. The suit didn't fit and the shoes threatened to slip off with every step, so she was forced to limp down the road while squirming inside the jacket like a child at a funeral. And again, just that combination, her like limping in oversized shoes, while Ayana is forced to rummage endlessly in a purse. I feel like that is a moment that doesn't come across in writing the way that it would come across if you watched it on screen. That shit's hilarious. How fucking pointless. Like, Ayana is even like, yeah, these are not working out. These are bad disguises. And they don't want to be in their blacks. But honestly, why not? Like, honestly, again, it's the same thing as them just trying to be stealthy at all. He would have just brought you, guys. It would have been fine. Okay. So, they walked along, attracting far more attention than they would have in their blacks, but at least no one recognized them as consultants. Sometimes boldness is the best disguise, Zen of the Masons had once told her. He hadn't mentioned how embarrassing it was. I mean, yeah, it's embarrassing when you're like this uncomfortable and out of your element, for sure. I am somebody who, like, when I'm going to go out, I want to be noticed. I dress to be noticed. I do my hair and makeup to be noticed. Like, that's the point. But there is nothing quite as uncomfortable as knowing you are about to be noticed for reasons that you didn't intend. So Shera says that she is surprised Ayana was sent and that she thought she was getting a team. The Luminians can provide auxiliary support in place of the shepherds. They're not so bad at that. If it comes down to gardening, you and I can hold our own. And basically what it is Shera is thinking that Yala, having sent Ayana, either maybe there's bad blood between Yala and Ayana that she doesn't know about, which she asks about, or there is a trap in here that is laid specifically for Shera, and Ayana isn't going to bear the brunt of it at all. But yeah, it's a, she just straight up suspects Yala, not Ayana, of just trying to undermine her at every turn. And based on what we know of Yala's personality, I think that is reasonable. That seems like her bag exactly. So, and And Ayana says if anyone is planning a betrayal, they shouldn't have involved the Luminians. They'll strike down anyone tainted by the elders in a second, but an unstained human will be better protected in Hightower than on the island. And she says, an unstained human, and I'm like, but you know that she's soulbound, right? And that thing that she's holding, you don't know where it's gotten its power from. You know, so she's very confident when she says this, like they have nothing to worry about, but she doesn't really seem to be considering. I don't know how aware she is of the extent of this blade's powers, because not everyone is a reader, but there is like a sense of, in this universe, even if you're not a reader, if something is invested enough, it will still fucking jump out at you. So I was sort of surprised at the fact that she seemed really unconcerned about something that I feel like could be a potential real problem, you know? Let's see, George, sorry, you got some chat here. Also, the Black Watch exists and their whole thing is using elder power or something, Calder's boats, right? It is a weird plot point that gets dropped and picked up sometimes, but the consultant's account... Oh, sorry, I jumped there. The Consultants Guild is known to the public as, like, very good investigators and accountants, basically. The whole spy thing is a rumor, and no one but the top guild people even have an assumption that Gardener's assassins exist. So seeing their blacks, and especially the daggers, would be bad, but it does feel like they don't really care about this sometimes, which maybe they don't care sometimes because no one would be able to associate assassins in black to the Consultants Guild. Yeah, it's sort of a weird thing, and the way that you say it's a plot point that gets dropped and picked up is exactly where I struggle, I think. The fact that so many people think they don't exist at all, and yet they are afraid that people are going to recognize them for what they are. If people don't believe you exist, like, is part of the legend of who they are their outfits? Is that well known enough to have made it into the lore? Like, just, it's fine, but it is kind of a back and forth thing of feeling like, all right, so either they can walk around like themselves because most people don't believe in them, or it is well known enough. And like, we know that Darius knows about consultants and he's aware that they are real and they're trailing him specifically. So maybe just because it's him. But again, they didn't need to, so it's just amusing. So, they get to the gates of Hightower, the headquarters, and it says Shera had pictured it as a child in the capital, like a version of the consultant chapter house, only bigger and surrounded by a wall. The reality had more in common with a dream. Hightower's walls were built from huge bricks of gray-white stone, looming over the surrounding trees. Shera and Ayana saw them a mile down the road, standing 50 feet in the air. Banners hung from the walls, and pennants fluttered from flagpoles on the parapets, red banners sporting a white sun. Most of the buildings stood shorter than the walls, only visible through the wide-open gates, but one structure loomed over all the rest. It began as a cathedral, like some of the other Luminian structures she'd seen. Ooh, that's a tongue twister. A confectionery building of high arches, pointed peaks, and plates of stained glass shimmering in the sun. I love when buildings are described as confectionery. I don't know what it is about that word, but it gets across so much about the overall appearance of a thing, you know. I just love that. So as soon as he said that, I was like, okay, I know what this looks like. And honestly, I've been sitting with Owen and playing Animal Crossing while he plays Elden Ring, and there are some really fucking weird creatures in Elden Ring. And when I was watching him battle some I'm not even going to try to describe it, but it was really creepy. All I could think was, this is like elder shit. this feels like the same vibe to me. And this sort of building is something that would definitely be in that game too. So it's sort of going to be my mental image. And I just wanted to put that out there in case that was helpful to anybody else, because sometimes picturing things can be tricky for me. I need a reference to really like pull up an idea in my head. Anyway, so it was impressive, certainly. But her attention was taken from the architecture to a scene on the road. The traffic had begun to dam up as something blocked the people's way into the citadel. Voices were raised, and among them, the knight adjunct they'd met earlier, Darius Albright. So this scene is interesting because we've got a duo of guards who have some, body mods, and Shera notices that they both have like the same modifications, and she thinks that has to be bad news because normally two people with the same mod don't get paired together on guard duty. So if they are purposely put together, that probably means that they play off each other somehow. I think we are probably going to get to see what that is eventually, but I don't know. The fourth member was a blonde woman that reminded Shera of Maya for one simple reason. Her eyes were orange and vertically slitted. They looked just like Maya's eyes when she lost control. So this woman is out here coming up with reasons to antagonize Darius. And it's interesting because I feel like there's simultaneously a vibe that she knows exactly who she is, or who he is, and what he's doing. And also, like, she doesn't understand who he is at all. I can't really decide what's going on. Like, she's obviously purposely going after him. But whether it's just to make a point in general, or because she's trying to come up with an excuse to take Darius specifically, I couldn't really tell. So she is like stopping his way in and is saying, our guild maintains this road. We have the right to make sure security stays tight. And they are like picking through the stuff in the wagon, and they come across the child-sized coffins. And it's interesting because this whole like back and forth is done in such a way that they have to play to a crowd, and it's not really necessary for like safety in terms of worrying that the people in the crowd are going to get involved in a fight. It's more that they each know if it comes down to going before anybody in authority, they're going to need witnesses. And they have to make sure that the people in the crowd are going to have their back. So it starts off with this like guard being like, look at these coffins, these child-sized coffins, in an attempt to like make him seem ghoulish somehow. Of course, then he tells them like, we thought we would need them, but I was able to save these children. And there's just like, he really knows how to spin things around. And this feels like the sort of thing he has had to do forever. There's just an energy to him of like, yeah, I know how everybody fucking plays it, and I will play it right along. I'm bored by it. I don't want to do this, and it's not going to work. So I'm already like, can we just go inside, please? But if you want to, I can do it. And they, like, it seems like they take off, but they don't. They, like, turn around, they regroup, and we are aware that the Luminian Order does not support the right of the guilds to choose a new emperor. What about you, Knight Adjunct? Do you support the Empire? Darius leaned one elbow against the cart. Surely there are more options than those two. Myself, I'm convinced we can all still reach some kind of compromise. A few months of hostile posturing doesn't outweigh 2,000 years of cooperation. As all this is happening, Shera is getting a real intense desire to go after this dude. His power and whatever's going on with him is extremely appetizing to her knife. And one of the guards starts sort of like moving in such a way that it suggests they are about to get a fight, And Cyphron is psyched over this. Before you continue on your way, I was wondering if you would do us the courtesy of lowering your hood. And again, he spins it. That would be disturbing, as my face was lost, taken in a battle against Urgnaut. It is my own scar of sorts. A warning would rob his appearance of its impact, and he was taking the initiative to make sure the witnesses saw it as a battle wound earned fighting the forces of evil. And she remembers Maxwell telling her an honest man doesn't know how to play a crowd. Maxwell's words, though she wasn't sure if they applied here. I'm going to go ahead and say they don't. I can understand that being something people would believe and feel. However, if you are a type of person who has had to manage people, and I talked last week about like the idea of living around an abuser and having to constantly be aware of their mood and what could possibly set them off and when they're really dangerous versus when they're going to be a little bit more receptive. If you are the type of person that has dealt with that, or in Darius's case, has had to constantly reassure people around him that he is safe to be around because they're afraid of him, you're going to know how to do that. That's not dishonesty. It's just constant emotional labor that some people are just better at because they've had to do it more than others. Manipulating a crowd is not always the same thing as like lying to the crowd. It's not the same thing as always like persuading them of something that isn't true against their will. You know, that's not always how that winds up. So he lowers his hood. He has no face. And Shera is just like, I hate this so much. She has like a bit of a flashback here and is just noticing how completely unnatural it feels. It was illogical that he doesn't have a face. And this is the sort of thing that when you have this reaction, the only thing that can cross your mind is that's not right. That's not how it should be. You know, when you see people who are, you know, like missing a limb, for example, and you're just like, but there's supposed to be a hand there. You know, it's just this sort of response of, it's like a simultaneous shock and also a fear. Like the very fact that they are not fitting into this like very specific able-bodied mold in your head means that potentially they could like be a threat to you or bring danger upon you because they have been in danger. So Elder Spawn seize him for questioning. The guard leader's voice shook and her orange eyes were still wide, but her lizard-armed men stepped forward. Why in the Emperor's name would you question an Elder Spawn? Only the Black Watch care about capturing elders, and even they aren't fools enough to ask for answers. If you really thought I was an elder, you should be calling for Knights of the Order. I see what you're trying to do, but there are enough witnesses here to swear that you started the fight. At this point, I'm defending myself. And one of these guards is like not really picking up on the vibe that maybe they should back off, and he shoves Ayana. And that turns out to be a bad move. All these guards wind up making it out of here alive. Nobody dies. But it's a very close thing. And once again, Cyphron is just champing at the bit. It just wants to be driven into everybody's hearts. And Shera keeps having to be like, and then what? Kill fucking everybody? Cool. And then what? You know, she's having more and more trouble controlling the impulses as well. Cyphron is wrapped in these invested bandages. And Shera is kind of thinking, these aren't really doing as much good as they were. And it's unclear whether or not it's genuinely that the bandages aren't doing their job, or if it's that that's how Shera's interpreting the fact that her, like, she is starting to be influenced more than she was. You know, I don't know. We'll see. She drove her claws into the man's enhanced arm. And immediately Darius is interrupting this, saying this man needs medical treatment and trying to like keep this from turning into a complete bloodbath. And from behind, it looked as though Darius had just swung his blade at a guard. So again, it really starts to go off. And eventually, Darius stops Shera because she is about to make a kill and says, this is getting way too complicated. And at first, nobody listens. But he finally has to say, stop. He says it in this like much more commanding tone. And Ayana's like, okay, why? And he says, if we kill them here, we'd be starting a guild war in truth. Which once they talk to his grandfather seems like even more true. The way he says it out here, I kind of felt like, well, like potentially. But then when we meet his grandpa, he's like, oh no, that would have fucking devastated everything. I love Ayana, only if there are witnesses, and everybody who'd been standing around watching on the street is just like, bye, takes off. They're the ones who need a war, not us. The Empire is falling apart as it is, and the regions are not interested in unifying. In a few years, the Empire will be gone. Time is on our side. Their only hope is to provoke a conflict somewhere they can win, which I suspect is one reason they were out here today. The Imperial Guard captain's orange eyes narrowed, but she gestured to her men. They limped over to her, one man pulling himself off the ground. My guild head will hear about this. Darius waved. Goodbye, and thank you for visiting the Luminian Order. May the blessings of the unknown god be upon you. Look, I said it last time, I'll say it again. I really, really like Darius. The whole killing with kindness thing is so effective sometimes, and I'm really bad at it because I have such a temper. It's the sort of thing that when I see it being done well, it's always so effective and so impressive. But oh my God, it is really hard for me to rein in the rage I feel sometimes. And it's such a effective tool because it's giving the person getting in your face the opposite of what they're trying to get. They want to cause anger and fear. But if you just give them friendliness and unfazedness, they don't know what to do with that. It's not the kind of fuel they needed, So I am very into this dude. I hope that he is around a lot more in the story and doesn't wind up just being a tool to sort of get them here now. But I mean, if he is, it's fine. But I really do like him. I'm interested. The first thing Shera felt upon passing through the gates of Hightower was a sense of surpassing peace and wellness in her soul. She just trusted it immediately. And I love Ayana is apparently on the exact same wavelength. It's very easy to be like, oh, Shera. But no, they're trained to feel the influence and be like, okay, what's happening? And Darius explains that this place has been invested over the years with this sense of safety because this is where people have fled from elder attacks or come for protection. And it just makes this cycle of energy that builds on itself, that more people arrive because it's giving off a vibe of being a place of safety. And that's what they're looking for. So that permeates the place. And honestly, I love this idea. A place that you just feel genuinely safe. There's a kid who would have been, you get the sense, outside these walls, he would have been picking pockets, but instead he's letting a guy know that he dropped a coin. Everything is so chill. There's a dude who comes really close to Shera and she notices that not only does she not put her hand on the hilt of her blade, she doesn't watch him pass to ensure that he isn't turning around and sneaking up behind her. It's just frustrating because what it comes down to is she's being forced to feel feelings that aren't organically hers. So even though it's a good sensation in theory, the fact that it is not real, it's not generated by genuine feelings of safety and calm, that is what Shera has a huge problem with. And she's just like, I am not, no. And she tries to sort of force the influence away. And honestly, in her position, that's 100% the right thing to do. But, you know, thinking about how I would react and just the extraordinary events of the past, 5 years that have just worn so many of our souls into sawdust, I can't help but be like, oh God, there's a sense of, wouldn't that be nice to just go somewhere and feel like everything is okay and I'm safe and it's fine? Oh, give me. So, and I love Ayana says, I think I'm starting to feel sick. Home is the place where you're most vulnerable. On the island, she was always aware of that. Here, you would just relax. It was unnatural. So we have them passing through a bunch of really intricately decorated and sculpted areas. People are still working on some things. Darius left his cart by the door. I'll have you shown to your rooms first. We won't be able to meet with the guild head until he returns, and I plan on making the most of that opportunity too. He was interrupted by the arrival of another pilgrim. And she is feeling like this girl is giving off an air of nervousness, which makes Shera feel a little bit encouraged that, okay, so whatever force this building has on people, it's not impossible to feel the real sensations that you should. Seeing that this girl is seems nervous and a little bit frantic makes her feel a lot better about that. So your grandfather wishes to see you immediately. And Shera's like, grandfather? And then she realizes because of his name, oh, God, okay, I didn't even realize who you are. And she was too busy noticing the beautiful flower garden beneath the stained glass and how the cathedral's majesty brought with it a sense of security. It was how she imagined it must feel to be a child standing in the shadow of a parent. Y'all, if that isn't such a sad, it's how she imagined it must feel to be a child in the shadow of a parent. Just that she has never had the luxury of feeling that sense of security. It's just, that got to me. I'm not going to lie. That was so sad somehow. So she notices that as they walk, people are pulling away from Darius, and it says some even look disgusted, as though they'd spit at his feet if they dared. And that is so, what a bummer. This is what I'm talking about with knowing how to play a crowd. This is the kind of shit he's dealing with every day, then yeah, that's going to be just a fucking matter of survival. I was being groomed for the headship myself before the incident with my face. Would have been the first guild head raised from the knights in 300 years, but what good is a headless leader? He chuckled, though they didn't join him. I mean, yikes, part of me is kind of well, I don't know, maybe being a headless leader would be kind of a cool symbol, but turns out he didn't even really want it. And he says that my grandfather kept me from being executed and I was able to stay in the field. He hesitated after that line, and Shera suspected he didn't appreciate his new assignment as much as he pretended to. There was something about his position that disturbed him. And yeah, we know what that is. So they come in. His grandfather is literally floating 4 feet off the ground with his legs crossed and this long beard. He sounds like the street performers in India that you see that allegedly are these renowned yogis, and they're just the whole bit and how they do it you can find online, but evidently it looks pretty convincing in person. He had pure white hair and a long beard, and with white and red robes of such elaborate cut that Shera imagined it took a team of servants 2 hours to assemble them on his body, which I couldn't even picture. Genuinely, like, would love to see an interpretation of what that would look like, you know? Darius had tried to tell Shera and Ayana to keep their mouths shut and let him sort of handle things. And Shera just goes on in and starts speaking immediately because, you know, that's just how she do. She is direct. She isn't going to let somebody else manage her. And this dude, he mistakes them for architects. And Jameson, like, realizes, oh, it's quite a pointed message. And Shera says, no, not a message. We're trying to do jobs. And this is, like, apparently, in as much as people may know about gardeners and consultants, well, they know about the architects. When she says that they are gardeners, it has to be further interpreted. They remove threats to their guilds, son, as you do for us, though I'm certain they operate on another level entirely. Most guilds had someone in charge of executions, though it varied on a case-by-case basis. In the Black Watch, it was usually the guild head herself. The consultants had the gardeners, and the champions had every single member of their guild. Evidently, in the Luminian order, the disposal orders came to the knight adjunct. So that is the comparison being made here. I am not entirely certain that it's, like, totally accurate, but in really what it is more like, it's not even a matter of accuracy. It's a matter of whether Darius would want to be seen that way, and I don't think he would appreciate it. So he mentions the altercation with the guards and the fact that they got away, and let's see. She points out a battle map. What you see here marks the points of control for the various guilds involved in our unfortunate little conflict. The guilds have been maneuvering for control since the Emperor died, but tensions have escalated every year since then. I'm not sure how much of it you've experienced out on the Grey Island, but next to the capital, we've been sitting in an oven. And Shera just says, haven't you heard? The consultants know everything. And she was trying to be funny, but he takes it as sort of an admonishment and was like, oh, I wasn't questioning your information. But Shera is like, you should question our information because I didn't really know that this was going on until like a couple weeks ago. So imperialists, an interesting label. It's the phrase the news sheets have for them. They've characterized us as the independents and the enemy as the imperialists, and I'm not sure which of us got the better deal. Anyway, the situation is much the same all around the world. They're gathering strength, trying to spread the word to the common people about the new emperor. Darius interrupted. It's our biggest advantage besides the obscene wealth of the Alchemists Guild. They need popular approval while we don't. The world will settle into new regions on its own. Precisely. And then I love this. Jameson says to him, don't sit on my desk. And Darius is like, the guy who used to own it loved to sit on it. Just genuinely like, I'm just following in his footsteps, which I found very funny. If I may continue, we will win over time, especially with the guidance of the regents on our side. We want this state of affairs to continue for as long as possible, which is why they have been provoking us with these stunts. The imperialist guilds would want to remove their biggest opponents, but she'd wondered why they were willing to risk open war. This filled in the gap. Assassins targeting the 4 regions would do nothing but destabilize the friendly guilds, the independent guilds, and force them to act. It might even goad the surviving regions into action. I feel like I only really have a tentative grasp on this, I'll be honest. And that's fine. Sometimes the politics of this world affect me in the same way the descriptions of what was going on with the Abaddon affected me in Cradle, where I don't entirely get it, but also don't feel like I really need to for now. And if I just let it wash over me, it will come together and make sense eventually. And then by the time it makes sense is when it will really be the most relevant. So it's fine, if that makes sense. So there has been no blood drawn so far, at least none that can be proven. If we start the fight and they can even fabricate evidence, it's to their advantage. Not only will they have popular opinion on their side, but they'll have a case to win over the two neutral guilds. The witnesses will thoroughly investigate any such claims, and if they find we have indeed wronged the Imperials, they will likely side against us, but we're far more worried about the champions. Even if only a handful of champions joins their cause, we may not be able to handle them. And Shera attempts a very measured and diplomatic response and is very happy with herself. It was well done. But you have to understand, she follows up with, we are on a mission. We're investigating the assassination of one region and the attempted assassination of another. And it turns out the reason that Alagaeus is when, she had mentioned his assassination to Darius and Darius hadn't even heard about it. Evidently, they're just acting like he's survived. Officially, he is still alive and recovering. Regent Loralee has not permitted me to say anything to contradict that point, even in private. But you must understand that I have shown you these things for a reason. So yeah, he does not believe that Alagaeus is still alive, which sounds like the reasonable thing. To be perfectly honest, we were in his head when he died, but he could have just been going unconscious or something. There is a possibility he's still alive in the writing sense, but I do not believe that he really is. When the Emperor died, we stopped receiving Imperial funds for the orphans under our care. We continued to do so, of course, but the long mourning took its toll on us. The increase in elder attacks alone. Anyway, I'm making excuses. I don't mean to. When the children left, we didn't have the resources to look for them, but we didn't forget them. We tracked them down years later, and we found out where the young men and women have found residence. The home of one Mackendy Maxius, head of the Magisters Guild. Have we met Mackendy Maxius? Is this a character that we know of? I just want to make sure, because I don't think that we have met them. And I am assuming, because Darius groans when he points this out, I am assuming that Darius's reaction is solely based on the fact that, it's one of the guilds that has them. Well, that is just going to continue to fuck everything right up. I wasn't sure if it was simply the implied consequences of who has them based on the organization or the actual person who runs the place and Darius's experiences with them. And I will find out. So then we go to chapter 9. Yes, I know the Emperor's name, the name he took for himself after escaping the elders. I think I'm the only one who does. Joran, Alagaeus, and Loralee didn't join us until later, after he had already begun calling himself the Emperor. No, I don't know his birth name, and there's a very simple reason why. He didn't have one. That's interesting. Why? Why not? Just getting little tidbits here about him. So then we go to 1800 years ago. 1800 years ago. Now, because of the way that the timeline on this moves, is that before the Emperor took control? How far? He took control 1500 years ago? Is that right? This is either well before he became Emperor and defeated or maybe they were in the midst of a war by this point. Not sure. Anyway, so this is all from a POV of somebody just called the Human. And he is crawling through this tunnel and is aware, because he's escaping, he had been a slave, that he could be being followed. And so he is like constantly looking over his shoulder. He is like reaching out and worried about there are things that could be like seen as just, oh, that's just like a bone fragment. And that is actually one of Nikothi's children because they are made of body parts. He had a sharpened bone stuck into the back of his pants, a makeshift dagger, but that was only useful if he ran into other slaves. So he hits this door, and he can tell that it is made by elders, and is like, that's weird. Why would there be a door? And for a moment he gets really excited, and there's also a sense of kind of, oh, but I could also be like walking into something really bad here. So it turns out there's 3. And it says one of these would be designed for Nikothi to exchange ambassadors with the territory of her neighbor. That would be the tunnel he needed. The other 2 must lead elsewhere in Nikothi's land. It might even loop back around to the corpse pits which he just escaped. The corpse pits. Man. Yikes. His breath came in quick gasps, as though the air in the tunnel had vanished. He couldn't go back. If he had to shovel more severed limbs and offal into the pits, as he'd done almost every day for his whole life, he would eventually break. His soul would die, as had happened to so many before him. At least once a day, another worker would toss himself into the pile of bodies, hoping to break his neck on impact. Yikes. That's like truly. Some people, some writers really know how to write a scenario that sounds so much worse than dying. And Will has done this more than once. So he feels a sense of the elder spawn who created the other door he's touching. He stands there for an hour, just waiting for some sort of impression. He's super patient, which I really admire. And he gets a sense of anticipation and of hunger. He peeled his palms away. His shallow cuts had partially dried to the metal, sticking his hands to the door. This door led to the feeding pit. And so he goes to the left, and he feels that one. Nikothi's signature was an insatiable hunger paired with the putrid stench of death. All her children were different shades of the same color, but he got no sense of death here. Hunger, yes, but another kind. It was the feel of curiosity unsatisfied. And of course, immediately I'm like, okay, we know who this is gonna be. Instead of a rough, round tunnel scattered with rocks and bones, this tunnel was perfectly square, with polished walls and a clean floor. I have to be honest with you guys. That's scarier. Like, I know he's in a tunnel, rocks, bones, dead things crawling after him. And don't get me wrong, Nikothi is scarier in her way. But there is something about really organized evil. And he's not evil. He's an elder, so it manifests as something evil because of the fact that it seems like this is a being that works functionally only on logic and the curiosity of understanding how things work in a way that can be very ruthless, but not because of evil, just because it doesn't care. That said, this is more unnerving to me. This perfectly square hallway with a polished floor. What? The ceiling was high enough that a human could stand to a crouch walking hunched over. The space was lit by sticky, uneven bags fixed to the right-hand wall every so often. They looked like egg sacs lit from within by a faint blue glow. Opposite each of these lights was a bronze panel on the opposite wall carved with letters. And he is reading them and trying, I say that. He is feeling them, but he can't read. He passes all of them after just trying to sort of like see if he can get anything out of one of them touching it. It doesn't work. So then he just keeps walking. Eventually there's a movement ahead of him. And for a second, he's like weirdly relieved. And then he realizes what it could be and sort of goes cold. And he steps out there and sees a spider moving like near one of the glow sacks. And he thinks, cool, so I'm definitely going to die. And it's just this, like, he really tries. And it's almost more embarrassing because it wasn't necessary at all. He tries to drive his little makeshift dagger into the spider, and it just like goes off to the side so that he misses it. He brushed against its body as it pushed him against the wall. Its skin was cold and covered in bristles. This was it. All his thoughts of grand rebellion, and it ended halfway down the hallway. And he tries to like turn around and continue with his attack. A bundle of sharp limbs pricked him in the back, pushing him forward. He landed hard on his elbows and chin, filling his vision with white pain. And he thinks that this is it, like, attacking him. What it seems to be is that it just didn't slow even though there was an obstacle in its way. It just shoved him out of the way. What this reminded me of is when in Animal Crossing, you have to go through like an archway or a doorway or just, you know, and there is a villager just chilling there, sitting and reading a book. And you have to like shove them until they begin to move forward and get out the fucking way. And this is when he realizes, okay, this thing had a specific mission it was on. I wasn't part of it, so it just didn't care about me. And that is not how Nakothi works. So I am definitely like out of her territory. And he comes across another door. Curiosity is another theme again, and a yearning for knowledge. If he could find answers to even one of his questions behind this door, he could die happy. It took him almost another hour to figure out how to open the door, which involved rotating the symbols in a particular pattern. He tried over 100 combinations before growing frustrated and seeking the correct method in the door's past. And he walks into a library and is like looking around, genuinely blown away. He'd only ever heard about them. And I can't imagine what it must be like, somebody who's just ever shoveled human remains, to come across something like this. And he is wondering if this is like genuinely where all elder knowledge is being kept. And there are no slaves, no servants carrying supplies, no one chained together, no body parts spread out for food, nothing, no evidence humans were here or ever had been. Maybe that's why the spider ignored him. And he's like, no, that doesn't fit. Because if this thing is a curious being and it runs across something it's never seen before, it's not going to ignore it. It's going to want to know everything about it. So finally, he picks up a book. He takes the book off of a shelf. And this is when everything comes to a stop. He puts the book back and they don't stop staring at him, which is a bummer because I really thought that would work also. Deep in the shadows between the towers of books, something moved. Bookshelves rose over the room so high the top of each tower was hidden by distance. The human stood frozen, staring at the shadows between the shelves. The darkness shifted and reality itself shook as the great elder moved itself closer. And it's a lot of tentacles. I'm not going to get into it. That's about what you need to know. And this is when he gets the sensation of intense knowledge. And he saw himself as a piece in a greater plan, sitting on a throne with only a second more consideration he could understand the steps leading to that future. Then the vision vanished and he realized each of the bookshelves was also a load-bearing pillar. He could see how the weight was distributed like latticework. And he grasps all of this, and then it's suddenly gone. And he doesn't understand any of this anymore. Wait a minute. Is this the Emperor? Is this the Emperor? That didn't even occur to me, but if he was like his entire life working for Nkothi, maybe that's why he didn't have like a birth name? And that would also explain why we're just getting the human, right? Like, okay. Bits of language drifted through his mind, his intentions translating themselves in words. I can't believe I didn't even think of that until just now, you guys, because that's like how this chapter starts. It's her saying he didn't have a birth name. And then we get the human POV. Like, that's clearly what he's telling us, basically, by pairing those together. And I didn't fucking... I'm dense as fuck. I swear to God sometimes. I think I'm so perceptive, and then some shit like this will just sail straight up over my head. And it's just embarrassing. My God. So, anyway. So he keeps, like, focused on this elder. And trying to figure out how best to get it to not kill him is basically what it comes down to. He could prostrate himself, but it's just like he isn't really into doing that. He feels sort of like, I can't belong to something that is willing to do this to me again. And when the words came, they brought with them absolute comprehension of their intent, making all other speech seem slow and clunky by comparison. And this is all caps bolded. A deviant. Interesting. Biological deviation? No. Biological uniqueness negligible. Psychological? Psychological anomaly confirmed. More interesting. And I am curious about psychological anomaly. I have to assume that that is like due to the determination that he had in escaping it all. But it may be also trauma. That doesn't feel like it's rare around here, though. That wouldn't be an anomaly. And then he says, I am Ahmagut. And this dude knows what that means. The human decided to continue thinking of Ahmagut as he. I am... The human began to introduce himself, but he stopped when he realized he could never define himself as the great elder had. Other slaves had referred to him by name. He'd come to realize people could not interact with anything without naming it. But he had nothing like a standard name. Some called him miner, some ditch digger, rock hauler, clean. But until this moment, he had never realized he had no name for himself. Nameless, alone, deviant, interesting. And finally, the human says, I am one who comes here for knowledge. And recognizes that, like, this is his best bet, but it's by no means a guarantee. The limbs shivered like a tree in the wind. One bulb spat out a cloud of spores. Time itself stretched for a long instant, and the human could practically feel possibilities branching out from this moment as the great elder deliberated. Changes come from deviation. Understanding comes from change. Deviance cannot be predicted. I do not want change for its own sake. I want the future. And in those words, the humans saw the future, or at least an elder version of it. All knowledge, all wisdom unified into one organism, a single, perfect consciousness that could bend in on itself, searching its own infinite contours for further inspiration. And he realizes that Ahmagut thinks that he has come to help him with this, like, part of the task, like creating something new. And he's like, you know what? Fine. If that's how he thinks he can use me, I will definitely, like, try and take advantage of being an elder of knowledge's, like, property, essentially, in exchange for perhaps figuring out how to take these motherfuckers down. And this is just like, that's the right attitude to have. If he had to walk the same road as one elder to uproot the others, he would do it with a smile on his face. So that is the end of chapter 9. George has some other comments. Sorry, George. We saw Mackendy in book 1C when Calder met all the Imperious Guild heads, he wore a mask. Oh, okay. But we didn't really learn anything about him besides that he was an amazing reader. I love that he said psychological anomaly after his answer of before we begin, what can I call you? Oh, that's right. I forgot. To me, it felt like the elder was immediately like, oh my God, you're crazy. I can't believe you asked my name. That confirms it. You're brand new. That's a good point. Yeah. I didn't even mention that in my reading of that scene before we begin. What can I call you? But yeah, he is demanding an identity of this being in a way that most people wouldn't dare, is the overall impression I get. So that sort of defiance and that awareness of how to cope with this particular being versus others is interesting. And that must be part of it. I can't wait to read more. Okay. I have to go, you guys. Thank you again so much, George, for commissioning this. And I'll be seeing you on Tuesday with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.